You have probably heard of the term misplaced modifiers being used throughout your study of the English language in school. The chances are you've seen many misplaced modifiers in grammar exercises and in your English classes, but you just didn't know that they were called misplaced modifiers. On the SAT, you will also sometimes confront sentences that have a misplaced modifier. And so, in this lesson, we will learn what a misplaced modifier is and go through 3 different examples so you know what misplaced modifiers look like on the SAT and what to do when you see one. Lastly, we will go over a quick tip that you should always keep in mind when looking at misplaced modifier errors to make sure that you do not miss any of these errors and make sure that you can spot them immediately. Now let's get started by looking at what a misplaced modifier actually is. A misplaced modifier is a phrase that is obviously modifying or giving more information. But the key thing is that this phrase is located in the wrong place in the sentence. Misplaced modifier errors occur when the modifier is referring to the wrong subject. That is, the implied subject of this modifier, so based on its location in the sentence, is not the actual subject of the modifier. Now, why is that? So in order for you to know what the subject of the modifier is, the modifier has to be located directly next to the subject it is modifying. Now, if the actual subject is not located directly next to the modifier and it's a different noun, then the literal meaning of the sentence will give you the information that is wrong. It will give you the wrong subject. Now, keep in mind that the SAT loves a certain sentence structure. It loves putting modifying phrases in the beginning of the sentence, ending with a comma. Now, whenever you see a sentence that begins with a modifying phrase followed by a comma, remember that the subject of that modifier must follow immediately after the comma for it to make sense and for it to be logical. Now, let us look at 3 different examples showcasing misplaced modifiers. Let's start with a very easy example. Like most new residents, the town's winding streets confused the Curtis family for a day or two. Now, the modifier is very easily identified. It's very obvious that it's like most new residents. Now, what is like most new residents describing? Based on what you know about the sentence, you know that this has to describe people. It's describing the Curtis family, right? So the Curtis family is obviously a new resident in this town, and this modifier is describing the Curtis family. So here's the modifier, here's the actual subject. But what you'll notice is that right after this modifier, the first noun that we see is streets. So the way in which the sentence looks like right now, it seems like streets is the subject of this modifier. Now, is like most new residents, is this modifier describing the streets? No, it is not. So in order to make this sentence flow and make complete sense, we need to put the actual subject be the first noun right after the modifier. So this needs to move over here. Therefore, it's answer choice C. Like most new residents, the Curtis family was confused by the town's winding streets. So the streets are not like most new residents, it's the Curtis family. Therefore, the actual subject needs to be moved to directly follow the modifier. That seems simple enough, right? Let's look at a slightly harder example. While driving down the road, the house with the large yard and small pond attracted the family's attention. Now, in this case, the modifier is again, look at it. It is in the beginning of the sentence. The SAT really likes doing that. So, while driving down the road. Now, what is this modifier describing? Who is driving down the road? The family, right? But notice that the family is located all the way over here at the end of the sentence. So, how are we supposed to know that the family is the actual subject of this modifier? We need to move it so it's directly next to its modifier right here. Otherwise, it looks like the house is the implied subject of this modifier. It looks like the house is the one that's driving down the road, which we know isn't true. So it has to be answer choice E. While driving down the road, the family was attracted to the house with the large yard and small pond. In this case, there's no confusion as to what subject the modifier is describing. It has to be the family. So therefore, the family needs to be moved directly next to the modifier so that there is no confusion that the house might be the one that's driving down the road, which makes absolutely no sense. Finally, let's look at a more difficult example. While working as a nurse in the streets of Calcutta, that was when Mother Teresa developed a profound love for the poor. Now, again, we see that the modifier is located in the beginning of the sentence, while working as a nurse in the streets of Calcutta. Now, what is that describing? What is this modifier describing? It's describing Mother Teresa. However, the way that the sentence looks right now, it looks like this modifier is describing this entire fact. This modifier is describing that was when Mother Teresa developed a profound love for the poor, which we know isn't true. This is describing a noun, Mother Teresa. So therefore, to make this sentence flow, we need to put the actual subject right next to its modifier. Otherwise, it becomes a little confusing. The modifier is not describing the fact of when Mother Teresa developed a profound love. It's not when, or that was when, or that fact. It's Mother Teresa herself. So let's move the actual subject right next to its modifier, right immediately following the comma. Therefore, it's answer choice B. While working as a nurse in the streets of Calcutta, Mother Teresa developed a profound love for the poor. So don't be confused with the structure that was when. As long as we know the actual subject is not the thing that's immediately following the modifier, we need to change that. We need to move the actual subject right there. So now that we've looked at 3 different examples of varying difficulty of what misplaced modifiers look like on the actual test, you're pretty much set. You know what they look like and you know what to do when you see one. But it's important to note that your brain is a very powerful tool. So remember, your brain is very powerful. It helps you deduce a lot of things when you see certain errors. But sometimes it can be too powerful. And then when you look at misplaced modifiers, your brain being powerful, that doesn't necessarily work in your favor. Modifier errors are often very easy to miss because what your brain does is that it tends to subconsciously realize what the subject of the modifier actually is, even if the sentence doesn't present this clearly. So don't let your brain do all the work. The key is to deliberately check and confirm that each modifier is directly located next to its subject. So if you see a noun that is not the actual subject of the modifier right next to the modifier or even inside the modifier, you know that it's wrong. So pay careful attention to precisely which subject the modifier is modifying, especially if the modifier appears in the beginning of the sentence, because you know that the SAT likes to use that kind of structure. So although your brain will automatically extrapolate the sentence's intended meaning, so your brain will automatically be like, oh, I know where the subject is. I know what the modifier is trying to describe. And as long as the subject is located somewhere in that sentence, your brain will understand what it's trying to say. But the key is to actively search for errors. So make sure that the sentence's literal meaning matches what your brain is extrapolating. So look for errors in the literal meaning. Make sure that the modifier and the subject that it is modifying are directly located next to each other. And that's how you know from only reading the sentence without even using your brain that the modifier is modifying this subject. That's based on its location. So now you know what misplaced modifiers look like on the SAT and how to deal with them. And make sure, as always, don't let your brain take over. You need to actively search for misplaced modifiers in the sentence.